Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with the Haydn Symphony Crusade. We're up to number 99, the home stretch, the second set of 6 symphonies that Haydn wrote for his concerts in London. This is the first symphony to use clarinets, 2 of them, and the first symphony that Haydn wrote to use clarinets. Mozart had been using them previously because he had them while he was in Vienna. But with these symphonies, Haydn established the shape and numbers of the classical symphonic orchestra, and really the nucleus of the orchestra that we know today. Double winds up and down the line, 2 flutes, 2 oboes, 2 clarinets, 2 bassoons, 2 trumpets, timpani, 2 horns, later enlarged to 4, with other composers in the Romantic era, timpani, and strings. That is basically the symphony orchestra as we still know it now. And for these concerts, Haydn had an orchestra of about 60 players, which is a modern-sized symphony orchestra. I mean, yes, now they have, like 100, 90 in the 90s or in the hundreds, but you get basically a full-size symphony orchestra with 60 plus. The rest is all just like strings and maybe additional woodwinds here and there. 60 players is a modern orchestra. And so when you see performances of Haydn played by teensy-tiny pint-sized chamber orchestras, you know that they are not authentic, however authentic they may claim to be, because they're just not going to pay for the right number of players. Most of the time, as often as not. Sometimes it happens. It's kind of a miracle when it does. But, most of the time they just go cheap and tell you that that's authenticity. And it's absolutely ridiculous. Not only are they faking it when it comes to authenticity, but the Hanover Square Rooms, which is where these symphonies were performed, seated less than 1,000 people, 800 people, something like that. 800 to 1,000. It was somewhere in there, depending on where they put the chairs and, whether women wore hoop skirts and men carried swords and, how much room each person took up. But the bottom line is that you had a very large orchestra in what is today a very small space. So if you were giving a performance of a Haydn symphony in a typical concert hall today, which holds, a couple of thousand people, you would have to double the number of players that Haydn had, for sure. And that's what he would have expected. It would have been absurd to take an enormous room and put a tiny little orchestra in it, which is also what we do today. So there is nothing about, the alleged authenticity movement in performing Haydn, which is authentic. They may claim to use reproductions of the kinds of instruments Haydn used and play them in the way that we think theoretically they might have been played back at the time. All of that's possible. All of that's possible. But in terms of numbers and performance venues, it's just all nonsense. So you should know that going in. On recordings, things are a little bit different because when you make a record, even if a chamber orchestra, you can make it sound very big. It depends on where you put the microphones. And it depends on what room, you record the thing in. If you have a smallish recording space and even with a chamber orchestra, it can sound very full. So, it's not a simple question. But I just wanted you to be thinking along those lines because these are big symphonies. They were written for the largest forces composers could get their hands on in those days, and they were on the grandest possible scale. It's that simple, and they should be played that way. They should be played like they are colossal, not like they are little miniature jiggy-higgies, whatever they call them. All right? So, number 99, it's an E-flat major. It's an absolutely fabulous symphony. Every one of these explores something a little bit different. And one of the most interesting things about this symphony is the relationship between the introduction and the rest of the symphony. Now, we've seen symphonies like 97, where there's a motto theme that evolves and gets developed throughout the entire symphony. And we've seen introductions that are very closely related to the music that comes after in the first movement specifically. And we've seen introductions that have practically nothing to do with what comes after. They're just introductions. lovely introductions. Well, this one, I'm going to tell you straight out, has a pretty unique relationship between the ideas in the introduction and what happens in the rest of the symphony, because the music of the introduction doesn't have much of anything to do with what happens in the first movement, but it has a lot to do with what happens in the second movement, the minuet, and the finale. And that's what makes the thing interesting. Now, there are relationships between the movements, but they have nothing to do with the introduction. So every symphony that Haydn writes has to be listened to as if it's a totally new and fresh take on the symphonic concept, because no two are identical. They really aren't. He does something special in every single work, one way or another. So I'm going to play you the introduction. The introduction consists of three basic elements, which Haydn weaves together in a sort of coherent mini form. Those elements are a little tiny melodic fragment, ya da 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 dum, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 notes or so. A staccato scale, jump, 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 going up or down, jump, 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 jump. First it goes down, then it goes up. But it's okay. And then a characteristic rhythm, which Haydn's used in lots of symphonies, and we've seen it before, of 3 notes. Da-da-dum, ba-ba-dum, ba-ba-dum, with the emphasis on the middle note. From those 3 elements, Haydn puts together this introduction with some of its own material and other things, but those are the things you should listen for. So here we have, I think it's Helmut Müller-Brühl, yes, with the Cologne Chamber Orchestra. And let's play the introduction. Here it is. So I'm sure you've heard those elements that I just described. You don't have to remember them particularly. The idea in these cases is not that Haydn is going to repeat them later on and you're going to jump up and down in your seat and go, aha, I heard that. No, not at all. The idea is that you will notice that maybe something familiar is going on, and so there's an extra element of coherence, a feeling of belonging, of musical material being part of a larger family. Those are the kinds of things we're going for here. When you know the music really well, when you've heard it like zillions of times, you may become so familiar with it that you know immediately how everything relates to everything else. And it has that extra depth of detail that allows you to do that. Haydn's writing it for people who are going to actually get to know it really, really well, but he's also writing it for people who may only hear it once and never hear it again. And they'll get the maximum amount that can possibly be got out of that single audition. In Haydn's day, of course, some of these pieces would be repeated, but chances were you would hear them a couple of times in your lifetime, and that was it. And so they were arranged for solo piano or for piano and strings, small chamber forces, so that music-loving friends could get together and play them at home in transcriptions and versions that would allow them to hear it that way. So, Haydn was not expecting us to be making deep studies of these pieces. He wrote them so that no matter what happens, they'll reward you. You can study them deeply, you can listen to them casually, and you're going to get exactly as much as you're supposed to each time. So that was the introduction. And now we're going to do the exposition of the first movement. Now this is in standard sonata form with two very separate subjects, which is really nice. I mean, they're completely different themes. But one thing you'll notice in many of the themes throughout the symphony, and it's true right away in this first theme, ya da da ya da da dum ba da da dum ya da ba da da dum ba da da dum bum. Well, you may relate that a little bit to the introduction because it's kind of like a descending and an ascending scale, but not staccato as it was in the introduction. Blum, 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 blum. No. But what matters for us in terms of the rest of the symphony is that most of the main themes in these symphonies begin with longer notes and end with a flurry or a sniglet or a turn at the very end. So, ya, da, da, ba-da-da-dum, ba-da-da-dum, like that. And you're going to hear a lot of that in these symphonies. I mean, in each movement, you'll have an opportunity to hear something similar to that, or almost each movement. It's going to pop up a lot. And you don't hear that in the introduction at all. But it's something that relates to material in other movements. So you have to understand also that the relationships between the various themes and between the various movements may originate in the introduction, or they may not. They don't have to. You can find them anywhere. That gives Haydn freedom, much more freedom to do whatever the music seems to want to do. So you've got an absolutely wonderful opening theme. It's really cool sounding. Then listen carefully to the motion music that takes us to the second subject. The motion music, as always, or most of the time, not in Symphony 95, it was very abrupt. But in this symphony, as in most Haydn symphonies, it takes us on a journey. It really does. It's marvelous how it sort of tends to digress and returns to the main theme, so it's the main theme that's sort of going on the journey, and then it finally settles into the second subject, which is a wonderful little jump bump 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 ya dum bum bum ba da 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 ba da 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 da. It's a lovely tune. Just ya dum bum bum da da. Oh, I love it. It's really gorgeous. And you're going to hear a lot of it. So anyway, pay attention to those things. The opening with a little sniglet at the end of the tune, the motion music that really takes us on a journey before it finally settles down to the second subject, which is a very sturdy, independent melody. It's not really related to anything that came before. So it's not a monothematic movement. It has lots of material. It's rich in material. It's going to give Haydn lots of ideas for the development section. I'm kidding, as you'll see. Here it is, the exposition. Now, I'm also going to play you the entire development section, because having given us an exposition full of ideas, just rich in material and incident and potential digressions and harmonic suggestions, and it does all kinds of things like that. The development section is based only on the second subject. Nothing else. It's amazing. It's just a big da-dum-bum-bum, da-dum. How much stuff Haydn gets out of those 4 or 5 notes is mind-boggling. Absolutely mind-boggling. It really is. And it's so much fun because, he's setting us up. He's giving us all of this wild array of material that we could possibly sink our teeth into. But then when it comes to the development, thank you, he's showing us, look what I can do with just this little bit. And that's also very, very typical of Haydn. He wants to make something out of some element of the exposition. Sometimes he'll run through the whole thing and you'll get lots of stuff for the development, but quite often he'll just find a little fragment of something and then just create a universe out of it, harmonically, melodically, rhythmically. It's really astonishing. So let's listen to the whole marvelous development section. Oh, it just is so incredibly developmental. Here you go. Isn't that amazing? Isn't that amazing? And I let it run into the beginning of the exposition, which is severely, the recapitulation, I'm sorry, not the exposition. It's severely foreshortened. We go right back to the development section. Haydn can tip to the second subject, pardon me, as we heard it in the development section, and Haydn just keeps on developing it right up until the end of the movement. And you can listen to that on your own independently. It's just so typical of Haydn's inventive genius. It really is. So that's the first movement. Now, the second movement is also in sonata form, and it's almost schematic. If you don't know what sonata form is, here's a great way to find out, because not only does it have an exposition, which is repeated, literally, a development, and a recapitulation, and a coda. You've got all of those things that we normally hear in a typical sonata movement, but everything is cut off by a pause, by a full close. It comes to a full close with a big loud chord. Da da bum bum ba da 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 da. Yeah. Every section. So you know when you're in the exposition, you know when you're in the development, you know when you're in the recapitulation, and you know when you're in the coda. It's really kind of cool that way. Haydn wants you to be aware. So the movement consists of the exposition is repeated, the development, the recap, and the coda. So that's 1, 2, 3, 5 chunks. And each chunk ends with a full close on a loud chord. And you couldn't be more aware of where he's going and what he's doing with this thing, which is just absolutely nice of him. Really, because he wants us to pay attention to the interesting nature of the themes. Now, the first theme, the first subject, ends with a trill, which is a squiggle, a sniglet. Ya, ba da, da da da, ya, da da, like that. So we've got the topos that we hear in many of the themes in this symphony. You know, something in slower notes that ends with a flurry at the end. And the second subject, well, the second subject is the lyrical bit, the little 4 or 5 note lyrical bit from the introduction. That's where the introduction comes in. And so I have made a little example that just gives you that little bit of the introduction plus that little bit of the second subject of the slow movement with a little pause between them. Here they are. They're not in the same key because this movement's in a different key from that of the introduction, but the melody is identical. It's really pretty straightforward, and you can compare the two. Here they are. Now, in the introduction, it's just a little motive that doesn't go anywhere. In the slow movement, it's extended into a lovely, warm, lyrical, songful melody. But the idea is the same. And so from there, we know where we are. Here is the exposition of the slow movement. Notice the wonderful writing for woodwinds. You don't hear clarinets in this movement. He's saving them. The clarinets come into their own in the finale. And, you know, Haydn he was very careful about how he used his clarinets in these symphonies because the players obviously weren't as good as they were in Vienna. In Vienna, Mozart had the Statler brothers, who were, you know, the first great clarinet virtuosi. And he wrote very extensively for the clarinet. In London, Haydn was encountering these instruments in the orchestra for the first time, and he gradually sort of warms up to them. But even so, his writing is never as adventurous as Mozart's is. Mozart would have dumped the oboes and kept just clarinets in his orchestra if he could. Haydn feels differently. Haydn uses the clarinets in the first movement particularly to enrich the woodwind section as, you know, co-equal with the strings. In the slow movement, there are no clarinets, but fabulous extended passages for the woodwind soloist, for the flutes and oboes and bassoons. And then gradually the clarinets will color the orchestra more and more and more. So that was, you know, just to keep, you know, so you're not like sitting around going, oh, where are the clarinets? And don't worry, they're coming. You'll hear them. So anyway, that was the exposition of the slow movement. And I want to play the coda. The development is short and rather tumultuous, and also based entirely on the second subject, mostly on the second subject, I would say. And then we have a full recap and a wonderful, wonderful coda. Beautiful coda that does, it's almost like a second development section. Haydn's codas usually are. He usually engages in more development. Most of the time we're told, if in the textbook version of sonata form, that the recapitulation restates everything in the home key, so we know we're in the home key, and it ends in the home key. Well, no one told Haydn that. He never got the message, because his recapitulations may be extra short, they may be more developmental, they may go in different directions, and then his codas start developing things again. The point of a recapitulation or a coda or both in a sonata movement is not that it stays in one key. It's that it reestablishes the home key. And you can do that by just sitting there, boringly, in the home key, or you can do other things and return repeatedly to the home key in a way which is extraordinarily satisfying and keeps us interested until the last bar. And that is Haydn's method. And it's really a much better description of what sonata form recapitulations are, because Haydn did them that way, Beethoven did them that way, and everybody later did them that way. They didn't just sit there and repeat everything exactly the way you heard it. I mean, lousy composers did, but the good ones usually found more interest. So here is the coda, which is absolutely wonderful with that. It's a terrific little military diversion with the trumpets. I mean, you never know what's going to happen. That's the joy of it. So here it is. Now, the minuet uses more bits of the introduction. It uses the da-da-dum, ba-ba-dum in the trio section, in the middle section, and it uses the staccato, da-da-da-da, and then boom, 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 those staccato scale figures as the main body of the minuet. And so the way I'm going to play this, because it's just easier, it's easier editing it out, is the entire trio section where you hear this, da-da-dum-ba-ba-dum-ba-dum. It actually goes that way, but you'll get the idea, the three-note motive, and then the minuet proper, which is da-da-da-da-dum, bum, 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 da-da-da-da-dum. It just all that. It's nothing but staccato thingies, alternating with some really cool merry-go-round music, actually. But, one of the things about these minuets at this point is that they're not really minuets. Haydn is heading toward what Beethoven would call the scherzo, or joke, or, dance-type movement, but not one of the formal dances. This is not, by any stretch of the imagination, a formal minuet. You could never dance to it. When it does get into a real 3/4 rhythm, it's more like a waltz or or like I said, carnival or merry-go-round music, or hurdy-gurdy music. There's nothing about it that's aristocratic, nothing at all. And it's sometimes folk-like or rustic, or it's a totally new thing. And Haydn said, at one point, I wish somebody would write a new minuet. I really do. And he did. He actually had written scherzos in his Opus 33 string quartets. So, he knew what a scherzo was, but not as a separate movement with its own special character. Usually very fast and rhythmically interesting. Haydn's not yet scherzos are not yet as quick as, for example, Beethoven's would be. Although he got almost to that point in the Surprise Symphony, and he's going to do it again in the last London Symphony, number 104. So he's just right on the cusp. But that doesn't mean that these movements are not absolutely fabulous in and of themselves. They are their own special kind of dance piece that was Haydn's trademark. And here is the trio, the middle section of the minuet, leading to the return of the minuet, which gets played all the way through without repeats. And you'll hear da-da-dum, da-da-dum, or da-da-dum, ba-dum, something like that. The three-note thing and the staccato scales up and down in the minuet proper. Here it is. And so we come to the incredibly delicious finale. Now, this finale has a main tune that does what most of the others in this symphony do. It has, it's a quick tune, but it has a flurry at the end. It's bum 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 ba-da-da-da-da-dum, bum 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 ba-da-da-da-da-dum, like that. So you've got the sniglet or flurry of notes at the end of the melody, like so many melodies in the symphony. So we know it comes from the same family of themes. And then you have a marvelous second subject, which consists of repeated notes. Dum bum 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 bum. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then a flurry. Da-da-dum, ba-da-dum, ba-da-dum, like that. And between statements of that, a three-note thing. Bum ba dum bum ba dum ba da 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 ba da da. So you've got that business from the introduction, and thus this finale does sum up the content of the entire symphony, as Haydn's finales all manage to do, one way or another, while still remaining finale-like, light, zippy, fun, not as, intellectual or whatever. This is a sonata rondo movement, a combination of sonata form and rondo form. Now, rondo form, as I've said many times, is A, B, A, C, A, with the A thing, the thing that comes back, called the ritornello, because it returns. Very smart. And the B section, in this case, is the second subject of what would be the sonata form movement, the bum, 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 ba-da-dum, ba-da-dum, ba-da-dum. That's the second subject. You'll notice it's introduced by the clarinets. The clarinets do quite a bit in this movement to make their presence known. Then you've got the return of the rondo theme, the ritornello. So let's go that far, and then we'll continue with the movement. So here is what is essentially an exposition. You have a first theme, a second theme, motion music, and then a second theme. Then it returns to the first theme. And the first theme, as is characteristic of many rondo themes in Haydn and other composers, it falls into two halves, both of which are repeated. That's how you know you're getting a rondo. Whatever else happens later, the basic concept is rondo-esque. And here it is. So you've got that dum bum 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 ba-da-doo, ba-da-doo. Oh, that's so cool, isn't it? Because every time it gets repeated, it's with different orchestration. And it gives Haydn a chance to show off all the colors of his orchestra, kaleidoscopically. So the A section comes back, and then there is what would be in the rondo form, the C section, right? A, B, A, C. C is a huge contrapuntal development based on the opening motive. Bum, 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 ba-da-da-da-da-da-dum. That's all it's based on, basically. And Haydn does just amazing things with that, just as he did with the second subject of the first movement in its development section. He's limiting his material. And so these two development sections have that in common, that they make a lot out of a little. And it comes to a glorious climax on the trumpets. Bum, 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 ba-da-da. And then the recap begins with a slow and cautious and somewhat quizzical, kind of puzzled, uncertain return of the ritornello, the A theme. And then it's on to the end, which I'm going to lead you to discover entirely on your own, including a particularly fabulous return of the second subject, which gives the horn something to do, and the clarinets have the final flourish. Oh, it's just amazing, but you're going to have to listen to it on your own. Here is the C section, the big development, leading just to the return of A, the ritornello. Here it is. And with that, we come to the end of the beginning. The end of the beginning of the end of the end of the beginning? Yes, the end of the first of Haydn's last series of 6 symphonies. And a joyous and marvelous work it is. I hope you've enjoyed listening to it and that you will go seek it out on your own and just play the whole thing as you sit enraptured at the mellifluous sounds emanating from your sound system, whatever that may be. So keep on listening, friends. Thanks for joining me. Take care.